My leaning forward then was just to switch on my mobile phone, and we're actually being transmitted, this bit of it, on Coulsdon's website as well, or Coulsdon's Facebook page rather. Thanks to Bob and Marge for that. It's a hymn which didn't have that tune originally, but I think it was easier to sing it to one that we knew. Interestingly, the writer, Andrew Pratt, is someone I met on my last sabbatical. I went to a conference where he was one of the speakers, and he has the ability to write a hymn in about 5 minutes, something I haven't got. I like to try and write hymns, but I never produce them quite the way that he does. Anyway, enough of reminiscence. The latest lectionary has decreed that the wise men who used to feature on this Sunday when I started in ministry should wait till Epiphany. That's the day when we should consider their arrival to the infant Jesus, and of course we probably won't, because we probably won't be worshipping on Epiphany. That then left this Sunday with a decision as to just what it should be all about. And it was decided clearly by the lectionary writers that they should concentrate on scenes from Jesus' infancy and childhood. Last year, it was the flight to Egypt. Next year, it is Jesus' visit to the temple at age 12. This year, it's the presentation of Jesus in the temple as a baby. In the Anglican tradition, that of course has its own separate festival, the festival of Candlemas, celebrated on the 2nd of February, which of course makes chronological sense because the 2nd of February is 40 days on from Christmas. I must admit I was quite surprised when I was at a course in St Andrews a few years back, that's the local church in Coulsdon, to discover that their crib stays up right the way through till Candlemas. They don't have 12 days of Christmas, they have it running right through the entire 40. The difficulty we all face and why things don't quite work in terms of being able to have 40 days to this day and so on, is that actually we try to cram the highlights of Jesus' earthly birth, his life and his death into the 3 or 4 months between Christmas and Easter, which means that we're bound to strain the chronology in one way or another. The particular pairing of readings that we have today is one that I haven't used before. I haven't often preached on this Sunday, truth to tell. The Gospel is, of course, the more familiar, but I'm going to approach it via that less familiar reading from Galatians. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born as a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. The New Testament has 2 words for time, one of which is kairos, which means the appointed time or the time of fulfillment. Many years ago, the church in South Africa produced a document called the Kairos document, which was a call that the time had come for changes to the nation and that the church had its part to play. It turned out they identified the Kairos correctly, and the days of apartheid soon came to an end. So this verse could be read as, when the Kairos had come, when the right time had come, God acted and sent his Son into the world. The verse continues in making the point that this was not a disruption of the world. Well, we might think that the virgin birth is something of a disruption, but there are other expectations to do with the Messiah that would have been much more disruptive. But it was the birth to a woman. What we've read in the Gospel makes clear is that the Jewish law was fully and properly kept. Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day, and then he was taken to the temple for suitable sacrifices to be made and for him to be dedicated to God on the 40th day. Born under the law, his parents fulfilling the law. All that enabled him to save those who were under the law, that is, the Jewish people. That, of course, was important for Paul, the Jew, to acknowledge. Though most of his ministry and most of his mission ended up going to the Gentiles, and he was very much an apostle to the Gentiles, those who were outside God's chosen people, those who were not Jews. He then offers words to the Gentiles, who of course made up most of the Galatian church. God's purpose was that we might receive adoption as children. The good news of God reaching out in Jesus was not simply for the Jews, but for the whole world. Gentiles too can be God's children. That's an idea which is present too in the gospel. In Simeon's response, the words of what in the Anglican tradition one might sing every evening, the Nunc Dimittis. There he says, Jesus will be a light to reveal you to the nations and glory to the people Israel, but a light to reveal God to the nations. This is a key understanding of the purpose of Jesus' coming. This is a breaking out from God's concern being just for a chosen people, if indeed that was ever God's intention. But certainly now it is about God embracing the whole world, all nations. Back to Paul and his words. Because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. This is not the only place where Paul makes use of that Aramaic word, Abba, a child's word for addressing their father. It was seen as a particular privilege to enter into that intimate relationship with God, that sort of closeness which a child has with its father. To use the word Abba is to use the word Jesus used himself. The Lord's Prayer starts with an Abba. And that, for the people who came to be part of the early church, was wonderful news. They could have the same relationship with God that was true for Jesus. Paul moves on in the rest of the verses we've heard to make the important claim that Gentiles mustn't slip back. They mustn't slip back to their old ways, nor must they do what was a big danger of thinking they had to become Jews in order to become Christians. That's one of his key themes, especially in this letter, that this faith, this new relationship, is one which is entire in itself, and it doesn't need any keeping of the Jewish law to make it better. Indeed, that runs the risk of making it worse. Thank you, Baker family. I'm sorry I disappeared. I seem to lose completely my internet connection, which is quite unusual, but I'm now back. I think we got to the point where I'd finished talking about Paul. So I now move back to the Gospel reading. We've already made the point that this is Mary and Joseph doing what is prescribed by the Jewish law. They are making sure that Jesus comes within that Jewish law. And we've also mentioned that part of Simeon's response, where he speaks about Jesus as a light to the nations. That's not the whole story that we get from Luke's Gospel. In the temple, Mary and Joseph meet not just Simeon, but Anna too. These are two faithful Jews waiting and hoping for the day of the Messiah. For both of them, it had been a long wait. And for both of them, the meeting with this child is the moment when their long vigil comes to an end. They are able to recognize God's new initiative in this baby. This is their release and good news for Israel and for the world. While this is good news, and clearly it was for them, there's something of a sting in the tail in what Simeon says about what is ahead. Simeon blessed Mary and Joseph and said to Mary his mother, "This child is destined to be a sign that will be rejected, and you too will be pierced to the heart. Many in Israel will stand or fall because of him, and so the secret thoughts of many will be laid bare." Of course, Luke is recording these words after all those things have taken place. He knew that Jesus was going to be far from welcomed warmly by everyone, and that Mary would experience the heartache of seeing her son die. Indeed, this is probably 50 years after the crucifixion that the words are recorded. Whether Simeon had quite such prescience, we don't know, but Luke records these words as a sign of what is to come. There is, however, an important message in these words for us all. It is that this birth and this life is one that throws down a challenge to everyone. Many will stand or fall because of him. As I once expressed it in a sermon, there is a need to take seriously the Jesus who arrives as a baby, challenges people as a man, and goes on challenging us through his living presence. That seems a pretty good summary of what is going on. And that's why these words can be studied near Christmas time or any other time. The Jesus whom we encounter and by whom we are challenged came as a baby, lived as a man, and is still present with us. Our response, whenever and however we make it, is to the whole Jesus event. His birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, and his continuing life. And responding to Jesus is exactly what we have to do. That is our calling, to respond to the Jesus that we have seen coming at Bethlehem and whose life we have traced and journeyed with. We've seen in this baby and this man the very nature of God. We've been offered the hope of salvation, of life with God. But it is good news that makes demands of us, that we live as nearly as we can in the way of Jesus, that we show Jesus' life in our life, and that we share this good news, the good news of Jesus and God's love for the whole world, with others. Jesus is a light shining for all the nations. Jesus is the revelation of God's love for all people. We play our part in sharing God's light so that everyone else has a chance to respond. It matters how we live, how the light shines in some way through us, so that the world may believe. May we rise to the challenge of showing Jesus in our lives. Amen. At which point, we'd better move on to our prayers. Hold on a moment, I'm just going to